Afternoon all. I'd like to show you this afternoon a very interesting Kasparov game when he was just 14 years old, played in Riga against Edvins Kengis. Kengis was a Latvian chess grandmaster, an 8 times Latvian champion, winning the national contest in 84, 87, 88, 89, 90, 97, 2004 and 2005. So this is before they were at the peak of their powers, both of them. And Latvia, of course, is the home of Mikhail Tal. In fact, Kengis had 4 draws in his career with Mikhail Tal, undefeated. So in this time, 1977, Kasparov's repertoire was limited. He actually played what looks to be, from the white setup at least, a London system. Kengis playing b6 here. Kasparov reacted with bishop f4, bishop b7, e3. The London system was also used, for example, by Matthew Sadler, one of Britain's top grandmasters, early in his career. So Kasparov had actually been using this system occasionally, and this is an interesting example. Knight bd2, g6, and now this London system triangle, blunting the power of the bishop usually. Bishop g7, h3, now black castled, bishop e2. So it's a very, very solid setup for white. Knight c6. After castles, black tries d6 here, a4, a6, as though b5 might be on the cards at some point. Knight c4, as though maybe there's a faint possibility of queen b3 in the future. And possibly this next move is a bit loosening for black. Kengis played b5, kicking the knight, gaining a bit of space. The knight appears not to have too many good squares though in this position. Let's put on a kibitzer here. If the knight just retreated, then maybe black can consider c4. It's a bit committal though, but the knight actually went to a3 in this position, putting immediate pressure on b5. That's one threat. Also maybe just d takes first might be interesting. So black reacted here with b4 in this position, conceding that c4 square. And is that important? No. If the knight went to c4 here, black could just undermine white's structure a bit more with maybe taking here, and this looks very comfortable indeed. Knight d5. I think black's actually slightly better here, and threatening to double white's pawns over here as well as attacking c3. This is pretty nasty actually, this position. So Kasparov wisely perhaps avoids this. He actually plays a capture away from the centre, and often you don't really in general want to capture away from the centre, but here it's very justified to avoid that horrible continuation. Knight takes b4, and now another capture away from the centre is played. D takes c5, but again, if white allows black to take on d4, then black's at least equal here. If c takes d4, e takes. There's an isolated queen's pawn. This bishop looks very fine on this diagonal. Knight looks nice. Black's actually positionally looking a little bit better here. If bishop d2, maybe just a5. So, okay, so in the game, another capture away from the centre. And with these captures, of course, this bishop is gaining potential scope. In this position, perhaps black's best is to just play d takes c5 and concede white that c4 square. It looks quite cosy for white in this position, with the idea of maybe continuing with knight f e5 and then bishop f3 to challenge this bishop on the diagonal. It looks quite cosy. So black actually played a more ambitious move, knight f d5, perhaps expecting, well, I'm not sure really what the limited options here, but with bishop takes b2 as a threat, as well as knight takes f4, this looks quite a fierce position. But Kasparov had something particular in mind here against these two threats, something very, very clever. He just plays c takes d6. So, giving black the apparent choice, luxury choices of either taking on b2 or f4, which damages white's structure. Now, maybe knight takes f4 is one of the better moves here, and avoiding taking on b2. This position, just knight d5, hitting the f4 pawn. I think black should be relatively safe in this position. But black actually played something which is a bit of a double-edged sword. Bishop takes b2. The bishop's a target tactically, and if the bishop does win the exchange, black's going to be frighteningly weak on the dark squares sometimes. That's something to bear in mind here. In fact, Kasparov emphasises that immediately with bishop h6, saying to black, look, if you want to take on a1, I'm going to be playing queen takes a1, immediately threatening mate, and that's pretty dangerous if the only defence, if there's very limited defences there. Black actually didn't take on a1, just kept his threats with rook e8. And now an exceptionally powerful move was played in this position, which actually engines, my engine assistant here, Houdini, absolutely loves this next move. I wonder if you can spot it. If I give you 10 seconds, we might want to pause the video now. So white to play, immensely powerful move which guarantees white the advantage. What would you play here? Okay, a slight alteration to the configuration of the position. d7. Now black's forced to take that because where's the rook going? Can't ignore that pawn. And what's happened here with queen takes d7 is the queen is another loose piece. We've got two loose pieces in this position. And Kasparov attacks now the bishop, inviting it positively to further white's campaign on the dark squares at the cost of an exchange sacrifice. Now, if the bishop retreated here, there's a problem with the other loose piece. If the bishop went to f6, then white has e4, and this knight, embarrassingly, is stopping knight b6, protecting the queen. So actually, white's actually winning material here. What does black actually play? He can't move the knight to b6. The knight is pinned to the queen. So instead, black did take the plunge with bishop takes a1. After queen takes a1, how does black actually defend g7 in this position? Well, if knight f6, there's a weakness of the last move with knight f6, which is knight b6. The knight was no longer protecting b6. So knight b6. What does black actually play here? This is a comfortable position for black. Pardon me, for white, just winning back the exchange. White's slightly better. It's not immediately the end of the world here, but white is significantly better in this kind of position, with still some attacking prospects. But what happened in the game was significantly more disastrous for black here. Instead of playing knight f6, which is the safest, one of the safest ways of dealing with this threat on g7, black actually played e5. In fact, of the three ways to protect g7, even f6 is apparently it's a little bit better than what was played. Just inviting e4 to win some material back, that's better than the game continuation. So why is e5 so horrifically bad? Well, we're about to find out. White gets a pawn now, another pawn for the exchange, and this knight which was on a3 is now a tower of strength on e5 central, and with numerous resources introduced like knight g4 as well. So queen e6, and now knight g4 discovers an attack on g7, so white is again threatening a mate in one. And now it's here that f6 is played, a little too late really, because it's not as good as the other position we had, because now white plays bishop c4, and there's an immediate threat in this position of knight takes f6 because of this very nasty pin. So if queen takes, we just take there and the knight can't recapture back, it's pinned to the king. So black has to do something with f6 in this position. If king h8, then in this position actually e4 is pretty powerful, winning some material. Because if queen takes e4, knight takes f6 is very, very strong. It's actually a forced mate in 6, this position. But in the game, it wasn't much better than this. White, in this position, plays e4 anyway. And what does black do? In fact, he felt the position was so bad now, he resigned. If black took on e4, then knight takes f6 check using that pin is a disaster for black. If king h8, we have knight e8 check. And what does black actually do here? He's getting mated shortly. If rook f6, we just take this beautifully. Queen takes f6 is a beautiful forcing move, because knight takes, we've got bishop g7 now. So here's a beautiful mating variation, which shows just how disastrous the king's safety is in this position. That knight e8 check is a mate in 4. But also, of course, knight takes d5 is pretty dangerous. It's still a mate in 4 as well. If king g8, knight e7 is checkmate. So this is a disaster for black as well. Black has to delay with giving up the queen and rook. Is nothing. So that's also more simply winning in this position. So after e4, this is a very, very bad position indeed. Very little choices for black. Once he loses that knight, e takes d. This is just material up for white, and white can even continue now with knight f g5 just to rub it in on g7, just to go into e6 potentially, or just take on f8. So it's a hopeless position here after e4. A crushing defeat of Edvins Kengis in 1977 using the dreaded London system of all things. So Kasparov showing the dynamics of the London system here, and the two captures away from the centre, particularly instructive and dynamic, and the d7 pawn sack, slight alteration in position, but exceptionally dangerous. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this game. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.